Welcome everyone to Lunch and Learn, Why Native Plants, sponsored by the Evanston Public Library. This is part of our climate resiliency program. And today we have two guests from Natural Habitat Evanston who are going to talk about native plants and the importance to our environment. This will be recorded, so if you have to leave early, you will be able to catch it later on the library's YouTube channel. And we ask everyone to keep their mics muted and their cameras off. You can pose questions in the chat and I will relay them to Allison and Leslie. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Allison, and welcome.
Allison, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself, and then I'll share screen when you're ready.
Sure. Hi, I'm Allison Sloan. I'm a co-lead of Natural Habitat Evanston with Leslie, and I'm also the steward of the Harbert Payne Park forested area that is we've been working on as a native plant restoration site for several years now. I invite you to check out our work there in that park. That's Harbert Payne Park between Main Street and Dempster on the east side of the North Shore Channel on McDaniel Street. We've built paths through the woodland area there, and it's a beautiful cottonwood dominated forest that has resident deer and nesting wood thrushes last season, and lots of woodpeckers that live there. So come check out the native plants in our area. We've also got natural areas in Evanston at Perkins Woods, of course, at the Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary and at the Ladd Arboretum. There's a lot of great nature and native plants to see right here in our area.
And we also wanted to mention that Natural Habitat Evanston, we're really trying to change the lawn culture is basically what we're trying to do. We're maybe I could share my screen now, actually, and then and you'll see our mission right in front of us here. We engage in advocacy to try to change city policies, but a lot of what we do is reaching out to homeowners and to yard service companies to try to garden in a more gentle way, basically. So let me get my slideshow situated. And then Allison, you want to start this off, and then I'll pick up later on.
Yes, I'll try to start this off. Everyone is saying that my audio is breaking up, and I don't know why that's happening. I'm going to try stopping my video to see if that improves the connection. So everyone just keep replying to the chat and let me know if you can hear me or if you're still having problems. So here is me with my video off. So just post to the chat if you have problems.
It doesn't matter, you're still breaking up.
Okay, so is this any better, any different? Or
for a second.
Okay.
Well, keep talking.
Okay, well, I'm gonna try to just launch right in here, and let me see. Is good enough? Okay. Okay, so to the first slide, Leslie. So what are native plants? Native plants are the plants that originally evolved right here in our Midwest region for at least thousands of years since the last ice age. They are unique and special to our area because they have evolved to grow in our particular soil types and with our particular weather conditions. And after they get established in our gardens or ecosystems, the great thing is that they don't require watering or maintenance. Let's see. They're the foundations of our ecosystems and our food webs. Plants are the base layer of the entire food chain. Insects eat the plants, birds eat the insects, herbivores eat the plants. And the thing that is so important about them is that, you know, most of us know that monarchs, for example, can only eat milkweeds, but in fact, most insects, 90% of plant-eating insects have evolved to only be able to digest certain plants. And so the more different kinds of native plants we have in our ecosystems, the more different species of native butterflies and moths and bees and pollinators and the birds that eat those species we will be able to support. So here's a great
I wanted to show you this
little field guide produced by the Field Museum. So the host plants that are native plants are needed by 90% of insects. And some of these common plants that are listed here are ones that some of us might call weeds in our own home landscapes, but as you can see, they're really important for a number of butterflies and moths and bees in our region, particularly butterflies here. And why that's important now is that a lot of these species are declining. And if we manage to put these plants back into our home landscapes, the butterflies do come back and use the host plants, and which is just rewarding and great to see in our own yards. And what's also so important about feeding these caterpillars in particular is that birds, you know, we think of birds as eating food out of bird feeders, and some birds do eat out of feeders and eat seeds at some times of year, but a full 96% of bird species that live on land need caterpillars to feed their young and eat insects. So here we go with a list that's been compiled by insect scientist Doug Tallamy at the University of Delaware and his masses of graduate students who all go out and really carefully observe native plants to try to figure out what their insect relationships are. And they've determined that, if you see on the right, the native oaks are absolutely the top of the ecosystem, supporting in our region 456 different species of butterflies and moths that need to have oaks as the only species that their caterpillar larvae can eat when they're young. So if we took all the oaks out of our ecosystems, that would be 456 species that would not have the food they need to survive. Cherries, willows, birches, aspens, maples, crabapples, hickories, those are all extremely important. So our trees, it turns out, do a lot of the feeding of our moth and butterfly populations up out of our sight. We don't even know this, probably because they're up off the ground. And then on the left of the herbaceous plants, goldenrods, it turns out, are the most important. And that's important to know because goldenrods and asters come up as what we would call weeds a lot of times in our alleys and at the edges of our lawns. And instead of calling them weeds, if you welcome them into your landscape and see what shows up when they bloom, and especially look at the leaves for insect holes and damage, you'll see this whole world come to life right in your own backyard. And it's really amazing to see. One problem with a lot of plants that you can purchase at box stores is that they are treated in the nurseries with a class of insecticides called neonicotinoids. Now, what this does for nurseries is that it ensures that they have a leaf perfect plant to offer for sale, and they're aware that, you know, a lot of consumers probably wouldn't want to buy a plant that doesn't look perfect. But what that means is that you have a plant that will look perfect to you, but might in fact be fatal to any pollinators that show up to eat your plant. There's no way to know that this is in your plant. It's going to unfortunately render the entire plant, from the nectar and the pollen and the leaves, poisonous for a number of years, as many as 6 years after you've purchased the plant. So that's just one thing to know about typical garden plants. And on to Leslie.
Sorry, I'm muting myself. So thank you so much. So why change the way we garden? I mean, another reason to the main reasons to use native plants, I think, are, you know, as we were mentioning, for insects to have host plants, because insects co-evolve with the host plant and evolve the enzymes that they can digest particular plants. As Allison was mentioning, you know, like the monarch needs the milkweed, similar to that. The second real reason to use native plants is generally in these nurseries, native plants, people are realizing the nurseries are realizing they're growing these plants for pollinators and for insects. So generally, all the nurseries we tested, the native plants did not have neonicotinoids, but cultivars or nativars, the nurseries were not asking about insecticides, so that there's no assurance that cultivars or non-natives will not have neonicotinoids bred in them. And as Allison mentioned, it's the most common insecticide in the United States. A third reason to use native plants is for all the environmental issues that come out of this. I mean, basically, what we would like to advocate is to reduce lawn and to plant a native tree, native wildflowers. Obviously, you don't have to plant natives to replace your lawn, and planting non-natives, you know, at least that's reducing your lawn. But I wanted to mention that replacing lawn is an important environmental step. Turf grass is more land use. It's our largest irrigated crop in the United States. It's about 3 times corn. It's more land use than corn, wheat, and fruit trees combined, according to NASA satellite imagery. So one reason to reduce our lawn is lawn wastes a lot of water. 30 to 60% of municipal freshwater supplies are spent in watering our lawn. Toxins, we throw toxins on our turf grass at 10 times an average farm rate. And then there's lawn equipment, the mowers and the blowers, and air pollution and hearing damage and even vibration damage is a concern I hadn't focused on until recently. The other reason in the importance of having host plants and native plants in your yard is the sort of a collapse of biodiversity that started going on already. I mean, many people have read about the decline of songbirds by 30% since 1970. I mean, in part, they don't have insects. You know, I just was writing in the roundtable, so maybe you saw that. But you know, the thought of whippoorwills flying around our forests, they fly around our forests with their mouths open. I was just mentioning this in an article on trees. They keep their mouth open to catch moths, but there are fewer and fewer moths, and so there are fewer moths, there are fewer whippoorwills. It's just sad, and many people know the decline of monarchs, which is continuing. Hopefully we can reverse some of these. The rusty patch bumblebee was a common bumblebee in our area, and now it's one of the, I think it's the only pollinator in the lower 48 United States that is listed on the endangered species list. It's declined 87% since 2000. It was in 28 states, and we actually have a project going on to encourage and also to monitor for the rusty patch bumblebee in Evanston. Mayflies are down 50%, and I'm not going to read all of this. You all know, and global statistics reflect the same. We all have had the experience of this cartoon on the upper right. you know, I can tell you that, you know, growing up, when I would drive, I happened to be in New England, when I would drive, you know, your windshield would be covered with insects. Now I know that I can drive from here to Ohio and have 2 insects on my windshield because I've paid attention to it. I know that that is happening. So we've all seen the reduction of insects in our lives. This is just an example of what can happen. This is a neighbor of mine. You know, she had lawn on her parkway and now she has a woodland garden. And, you know, people stop and they, you know, this is not a horror to people. People are stop and enjoy her little garden here. This is her front yard. So it was Pachysandra and now it's natives. It's, you know, this is in the course of about 2 or 3 years, 2 years really. This is just another person who, another friend who, you know, just next to a regular lawn has a little pollinator garden. You know, every step matters. So I just want to call that out. And container gardens, you know, the planting natives in containers is doable. It's hard in Chicago area. We have hard winters. So you need, you know, the deeper the better for a container. And we can talk about that more if that is of interest to people. These are plants that do pretty well in containers. They're not as, you know, crazy tall prairie plants. They're more contained plants. And there's a little, I'm going to share this slide deck out with you so you can look at some layouts. And I have, at the back here, I have some links to show you. These are places where you can buy neonic-free native plants that have no neonicotinoids. And I want to call out in particular, I mean, these are local Illinois, Piso Group, Possibility Place is down in Moni. People are, you know, love Possibility Place. Shady Grove Wildflower Farm, Allison is starting that in Evanston. So I have to, you know, mention that, but these are all great places to order natives from. In addition to that, we have their native plant sales going on right this minute. Betsy Rhodes School still has a few plants as the last time I checked, which was yesterday actually, for purchase, but they're getting to the end of their plant sale for pickup later in May. We at Natural Habitat are pairing with the Evanston Environmental Association, and we have a plant sale going on, and there are lots of things available. The Chicago Audubon Society will be offering a plant sale. Go Green Wilmette is going to have an in-person plant sale on May 8th, and Open Lands Now has a plant sale for purchase online. So those are just mentioning those. And this, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I wanted to mention, so these are a variety of species that produce berries and fruits. And these produce seeds and nuts. So if you're looking for, you know, a particular type of things to add to the forage and the food for wildlife and for you in your backyard, some of these you can actually eat. You know, hazelnuts, pecan is a native. There are other things. And this is another view of native plants. You know, what blooms in spring, summer, autumn, and winter, because ideally you want to have early spring pollen and late winter berries and nuts in order to help birds throughout, well, pollinators in the spring and birds, but then because birds rely on insects, and then through winter for overwintering birds. These are just other lists for you to look on at your leisure, and National Wildlife Federation and Audubon Society have different lists of species that help birds or insects. These are references for what we've talked about, and I can be quiet now and hear what your thoughts are. Maybe I'll stop the share and hear what you all think.
There are a couple questions that came in through chat, Leslie and Allison, so I'll relay those. One person asked if there are aspens in Illinois. Maybe they meant, are there native aspens?
Allison, do you want to talk about aspens?
Quaking aspens are native here. Is that right, Leslie?
I believe that they are. I believe they are native, but I think that they're infrequent. Is the reason that on that wildflower list it doesn't say native aspens. I think that it's not as common to have them here.
Yeah.
One thing I also failed to mention. Well, go ahead, Allison. Were you going to say anything?
Oh, no, I was just thinking that you don't see aspens that frequently in the remnant natural areas and forest preserves around here, for sure, yeah.
I wanted to mention that there also another tree program that I didn't include on the slides is Tree Plenish, which is three ETHS Evanston High School students who are offering trees for about $4.30 per tree. So these are itsy bitsy baby trees. I mean, 18 inches, I think. But the species they're offering are quaking aspen, red maple, and eastern redbud. So if you're interested in that, I can also send links on that.
Okay, thank you. Another question we had is, what are the Evanston regulations concerning plantings and parkways?
Should I take in parkways, in terms of Parkway trees are supposed to come from a City of Evanston list, and you have to get permission. Basically, the city expects to plant the trees on the Parkway, but I have gotten permission, to be honest, to plant the trees myself. So I think that's not necessarily a hard, fast rule, but the trees that you plant do have to come from from the city list. So you have to email forestry and get their permission. For pollinator gardens, that also requires permission from the city. And they are developing a different process than they had in the past. In the past, it was very loose. You basically just emailed in what you were thinking of, and often within a day, you got the answer back. And really all that the city cared about was that that anything planted on the Parkway be 3 feet or less. Now there's going to be more of a process to it because they do have a natural areas officer who's trying to be more on top of what's going on in the parkways. So we're waiting to hear what's going to happen with that. And Allison and I are on the edge of our seat waiting to hear what the natural areas officer says about parkway permissions. I hope that answered your question, and otherwise ask me more.
Leslie, does that mean that if people want to plant the parkways, they need to contact the city?
Yep. For parkways, you're supposed to contact the city.
And basically, do you have to provide a plan for what you're going to plant?
Well, the process is changing, so we don't exactly know. But what I was told is they will not have to. What I would do is to email 311 first of all and say you want to do a parkway planting. But what I was told is what they're going to require is sort of a list of plants, and not necessarily a layout of what plants where things are going to be. And then what I was told is the city will respond saying, that's fine. And except for these 3 too tall things, for example, and you can trade out species for this list of species. So I think there will be a long list of city approved pollinator plants that you can use or sub out for your the ones that are on your own list, something like that. But we haven't seen it, so I'm a little bit guessing, but I got an email that sort of said that.
Okay. Another person said they can only garden on a balcony. So are there any native plants that one could grow on a balcony? The person did not specify how much sun they have.
Yeah. So the biggest thing with balconies is figuring out what kind of containers you might have that would fit there. Basically, the containers need to be at least 12 inches deep for the plants. If you want to overwinter on the balcony, they have to be 3 feet deep, pretty much for Chicago winters. So, there's our cedar boxes that are 3 by 3 by 3 sort of cubes and things like that, or there's stone is an option that might be able to overwinter. Metal overwinters, but glazed ceramic doesn't overwinter as well. The problem with this is obviously weight on balconies, especially water in containers, because the containers do take more water because they do dry out more than in-ground plantings. So you have to figure out what would be appropriate for your balcony. But given that, yes, the answer is yes. And even if you had a shallow, or like a 12-inch deep container, you can plant in that, and then, either see if you can bring it inside, put it in somebody else's sheltered area, keep it watered during winter and somewhat covered a little bit of water, only a little bit of water. You don't want to overwater it because it'll freeze up and drown. But you know, you don't have to necessarily plan to overwinter things. If you're not planning to overwinter things, it's easier, but of course everything dies. Not everything dies, but in 12-inch plantings, you probably don't have a high survival rate. And I have lists and I have links at the back of that presentation of possible plant choices. So there are lots of things that you can do. I mean, echinacea, coneflowers, Jacob's ladder, the geraniums, wild geranium. There are lots of plants that are native plants that can go in containers. And I mean, some of these websites say, I don't have experience with everything, but some of these websites say anything can really go in a container. It just won't necessarily survive. But that's not, you know, there's no way you want to put a plant that's more than, you know, 3 feet tall in a container. It just doesn't seem reasonable to me. But anyway, that's that answer, if that serves.
Okay. Someone asked about the new hybrid coneflowers. You know, there's a lot of different hybrid cultivars with different colors. Do they still provide the same amount of nutrients, nectar, etc., as the native coneflowers?
I could start off on this question. Allison, I'm sure, has ideas about it too. So the issue with nativars, which are cultivars of native plants, some do serve the, you know, can be a host plant for native insects. What generally, sometimes that's not true though. So what, you know, it's uncertain. And I don't know of, there have been studies of certain native plants and how they work as cultivars and not of everything. So yeah, I don't know on these particular plants, but the general situation is the reason we're supporting native plants is because, you know, the monarch co-evolved with milkweed so that it has an enzyme that can dissolve, that can digest the, you know, sort of toxic milky sap that's in milkweed. Well, that's true of a lot of other native bugs. And these bugs have certain enzymes that help them digest chemicals in the plant they might not otherwise be able to digest. So the concern is that if you change, when we change a plant because we want it, you know, shorter, different colors, different variegations on the leaves, we then may be changing the chemistry of the plant, and it may no longer be a host plant for native insects. That's the big concern. Now, when they've done these different testing on some native plants, and this is only a handful of native plants that have been tested for whether they, whether the cultivars serve as a host plant still, it's primarily been that when they change the color or the number of petals or the variegation in the leaves, those are the things that really generally have changed the chemistry of the plant and no longer make them viable as a host plant. But just changing the height, for example, that doesn't necessarily, there are plants where they've shortened the native species so that it's a cultivar at a shorter species, and that hasn't made the, well, it has a, insects still can use that nativar as a host plant. This is kind of complicated and technical. I hope I'm not too confusing in saying this, but Allison, straighten me out.
No, that was great. One other just issue to know about all of the nativars is that they're all genetic clones of each other too. They're not reproduced by seed, and that's, you know, a plant going to seed in its ecosystem is a really important part of the life cycle of native plants, you know, because the seeds provide food all winter for birds, and that's how they reproduce genetically too. So it's kind of a question whether the nativars might be kind of how they're possibly, you know, kind of weakening or reacting with the native straight species of those plants in the natural environment. That's kind of another concern. And another interesting thing to think about is, you know, insects that have evolved with tongues, proboscises that are exactly to fit into a certain plant, flower head, and them not being able to obtain the nectar they need from the altered flowers. So there are a lot of concerns and reasons to just seek out the straight species when you can.
There's another question. Someone asked if there are any Evanston area specialists or landscapers that you can hire to help you create a native plant garden. If you would prefer to answer that, I could share that information when I send out the YouTube.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to do this. Otherwise, I can give emails and things like that.
Okay, we'll share that information later. Someone else asked if Evanston landscape companies follow city rules for parkways. And then he also asked about planting winter creeper. I'm also a gardener, and winter creeper is not a native and it can be invasive. So you might want to consider some more native perennials if you're looking for a ground cover, and maybe Allison and Leslie can address that. And then he also was asking about rabbits damage. So he was asking about landscape companies following city rules for parkways, winter creeper, and rabbit damage.
Well, the landscape, the parkways are city property, and I know everyone is supposed to abide by city guidelines. Whether all landscape companies do that, actually get approval for their plans, I don't really know. It would be a good question for the companies, maybe. A winter creeper is an invasive, well, it's a non-native ornamental plant that's been brought over here and sold by nurseries. And it is one of the plants that at this point has begun naturalizing into woodland areas and outside of its range. So just to be clear, so there are a lot of plants in our communities that were brought over from other countries, and including almost all of our food plants, and most of what we plant in our yards, most of what's available for sale from nurseries is from other countries, and that's not always a bad thing. A lot of plants are well behaved and stay in their place, but the plants that become a concern are the ones that, because they have no natural predators here, and are perhaps spread by seeds or berries easily, they then spread to the wild and outcompete our native plants. So, because we've just learned that all of our native plants have predators, insect and bird predators that have evolved to eat those, that whole ecosystem gets out of whack when some of our landscaping plants are released into the wild, because nothing eats them, and they're on a different time schedule because they are from other parts of the world. So often they leaf out the earliest. Right now, if you go into the natural areas, you'll see, well, you might see winter creepers starting to come out in some places, but you'll see the European buckthorn is leafing out already in our woodlands. And that was a European ornamental that we brought over to use as a hedge in the 1800s. And it's going to go down in history as the plant that ate the Midwest. You see it everywhere along the roadways, that you see big thickets of shrubs that are all leafy and dark green. That's all buckthorn. So that's kind of the concern with these ornamental plants that are not so well behaved, is that they will just take over our natural areas and outcompete our native plants for light and for nutrients and water. Which has happened on a very large scale. We all of the woodlands in the Midwest are infested with buckthorn.
Allison, are there any natives that you could recommend people use as a alternative ground cover that provides food for pollinators, but is also native and not necessarily invasive?
Sure. Yeah, some of these might, in fact, already be growing in your yard. One great way to start, just by identifying what's in your yard, is by trying to photograph and look up on iNaturalist which plants you already have growing, because there might be some good natives trying to come up through the lawn grass and as weeds on the margin. That are actually really beneficial to pollinators. One that a lot of us see in our yards is common blue violet, and that's one that Doug Tallamy recommends as a ground cover because it's so important to native bees. And the violets in my yard, I can tell how important they are because they just get chewed to shreds and are full of holes by midsummer. So common blue violet is a good ground cover, actually. I like putting in wild strawberry. That's a nice native ground cover. It spreads out quickly and it has really high pollinator and wildlife value, and an added bonus of having delicious edible berries. Wild ginger is a good ground cover for shaded areas. Leslie, do you have any other?
Yeah, so I saw that one pop up. So sedum ternatum is another for sun. It's a sedum that grows locally. If people are looking for more of a turf look to their garden, Pennsylvania sedge or oak sedge grows in well, sun to shade pretty much anywhere. And I use buffalo grass, but that is a warm weather grass. So it really only turns green when it gets to be warm weather, but that's a US native grass. And there's also pussy toes, and there are lots of small flowers that will spread as you know, ground cover too. Anyway, I hope that is helpful.
Are calyxes a good alternative to lawn?
Yeah, so the Pennsylvania sedge is a calyx. It's yeah, and there, that works for a lawn because it does tend to if it gets going, it tends to grow pretty well. Ivory sedge is another sedge. Calyx are sedges that can grow and look a little lawn-like, but it tends to be more in tufts. Pennsylvania sedge is also a little bit in tufts, but it can sort of fill in a little bit more. And then, and those, I'm mentioning those two because they're basically 6 inches tall, and buffalo grass is the same. It's a short, so you can let it go to seed. This is the wildlife value aspect of this. This is why we want to trade out, you know, non-native turf grasses for native grasses, because these short native sedges and grasses can go to seed and provide food for pollinators, and they often are skippers. Little tiny butterflies are often use these sedges and grasses for host plants. But in addition, the birds can use the grass, as opposed to turf grass, which grows tall and people have to cut it, and it really eliminates any wildlife value at all to turf grass. But yeah, and then there are a lot of other grasses and sedges that are, you know, 1 foot to 2 feet tall. They're not quite, they don't mimic a turf grass, but, you know, it's, I mean, you know, when you talk to, you know, people who know about native plants, I mean, they really, you know,